First and foremost, thank you both for fascinating and very interesting and important perspectives. I wanted to start now with you, first of all, Ingeborg Øfsthus from Statnett. What do you see as the implications for Statnett on the supply side of this supply crunch?
Well, you have heard earlier Elisabeth today, and you heard our minister, and the expectations to us, they are very high. We truly need to continue to step up when it comes to our activity level. So the timing is the first thing, right? Everybody else is doing the same, right? It's not only in Europe, I think it's globally, right? So we are actually truly into a kind of a new gear here. So what we see then is, of course, there is a lack of capacity. And I think there is definitely then a lack of, in some cases, also a lack of competition. And this is not only with our dear partners that we're working, but you also have issues with your subcontractors, right? That there's not so many to choose from. Also, it goes all the way to raw materials as well. So, of course, this lack of capacity leads to very long delivery times. We heard you're almost sold out, Andreas, right? Right? So, and meaning that we need, we are talking about, for some types of equipment, 6 to 8 years. And of course, it has huge impact on prices. We are talking about 100% price hikes in some cases here. We see it's not... and we need to understand the kind of the full picture, because it's the raw materials, it's the subcontractor part, it's this, but we also see in some cases higher margins. But we need to understand end to end what is kind of bringing this. So, of course, then this is a challenge for us, and we also should take into the picture that geography matters here, right? We need to have the right partners here, and we need to think about our supply chain, the risk of our supply chain. We need to work with partners that can also be regional and locally present. So we need to work with partners where we can also share, I would say, sensitive data. So it's not an easy time right now. And you said you were not worried. I'm a little bit worried. I think we can solve it, because we do, I think, but it was said by both the gentlemen here, we need to change how we work together. And I heard a very, very good keyword already, this long-term planning and insight. That's where we need to start.
Thank you. And to you, Andreas, I think we copied the title of a very interesting article that you wrote, the name Supply Crunch. And this will arguably affect the green transition. But if you can say, you were talking about some years, some perspectives ahead. But do we see the current market shift as a temporary shift, or is it basically permanent?
As I see the industry at the moment, I would say we can speak of a super cycle, because with the projections and the planning going from 10, 15 years, I would say this is going on for 10, 15 years, maybe even longer. And whatever scenario you can imagine, it may be some little ups and downs, but in general, we're using more energy, we're using more data center, we need more grid for that. The network is changing, because since we now need the net not only as a safety option, we need it now actually as an enabler for connecting energy resources and connecting countries and so on. This will go on for a while. And that's why I'm saying I'm optimistic, because whatever issues we have on the short run, we will solve in the mid run and in the long run, as long as we work together and getting the alignment and understanding each other better. I think it's a big cultural shift from a kind of transactional behavior of utilities and us to a partnership and sharing the data. But I think in a situation like that, there is no other option, if you ask me. But that will create exactly what we need. And if we can plan, we can order better, we can solve issues, we can manage things around. So I think there's a lot of value in that.
Thank you. And Ben, you understated some of the points coming from Andreas in your keynote. What concrete role can NGV play in securing the green transition, as seen to his points and Ingeborg's points?
Yeah, thank you. I think all of us kind of national transmission companies, we have loud voices in each of our countries, right? Statnett is clearly the recognized expert within Norway, the same with National Grid. So when we advocate for change, people do listen to us, right? And so I think the biggest impact that we can have is doing the sort of thing that we're talking about today, which is talking about this need for long-term planning, and that for those long-term plans to have consequences in terms of permitting and so on. One thing that I didn't talk about in my remarks, which I'll emphasize now, is the risk allocation in the regulatory settlements, because we're all regulated utilities. Traditionally, it was 4 or 5 year set and forget. We went in, we had a negotiation with the regulator on what we were going to build. The costs for that allowances were fixed, and then we had to go away and we came back 5 years later. That doesn't work anymore. We need to have flexible arrangements where the system operator identifies growth, demand, need for new projects. We can then go to the regulator. It doesn't matter where we are in the cycle, and have a discussion and agree that need case. And then we need to have a flexible approach to costs. As I said earlier, we need to be able to make down payments to Hitachi and to other big suppliers so that they can start programmatic bodies of work for us. And then the overall costs for the projects sometimes may not be known for some time, so there needs to be flexibility in the regulatory settlement to do that. But here's the thing, transmission actually is usually a pretty small element of the overall bill. But everything depends on transmission, not least those constraint costs that you talked about earlier. And so if you think about really what's the most important thing about what we do in this new world, cost is important, but time actually is more important. And if you look at the new regulatory regime in the UK that Ofgem's bringing in, actually we are able to pass through most of the cost risk to the customer. They're better able to, we find out from the supply chain what the new cost will be. It goes through to the customer. What we're incentivized on is time, because that's the real value to the customer.
Flexibility as a key word, Ingeborg. How do you perceive the communication and the cooperation between the parties to solve the bottleneck?
Well, I guess to start with, we go way back. Many of us, right? These are, we have been discussing for a long time, and we have also, I think, relevant and good arenas. We also have newer partners where we need to get to know. But I think that what we really need to look into now is that we need to step up, because what we have done so far is not getting us to the next level. I think first we need to step up when it comes to truly communicate our plans, and also get insight into what makes life as a vendor easier. How do you plan your production? So it starts with kind of step up and truly have a transparency around, how do we make it easier to work together? And then second part is that we need to step up on standardization to see, where can, and we come from an industry which is very not standardized. I say it, I come from telecoms, right? And the meaning that any step we take actually means something, then it's very important. And I think we need to stop pointing at each other and say, oh, the TSO need to kind of standardize, or the vendor needs to, we need to do it together. And I think we need to, I was so happy when I saw on your slide, standardization and cost cutting. I was not talking about cost cutting, but I think we need to be sure that we are standardizing solutions that can scale. We are standardizing cost-efficient solutions, because in the end, somebody pays this bill. And I think that if we are able to come up with good solutions that are cost-efficient, then we can do more. And finally, more long-term, I think we need to step up together when it comes to the competence crunch, because that was one of the bottlenecks you mentioned, right? And we know that there is so much work to be done, and the people to do the job across Europe, I think also in Norway, we need to get the right people educated, and we need to so that I think is also something for the industry to step up on.
Great point, thank you. And Andreas, you had some points, and you were talking about some of these things, but I would just like to ask you concretely, Hitachi, your company, your market, what do you need to do differently if you were to point out a few things going forward?
I think there's quite a lot of things we have to do differently because the market is changing. For us, I think the transition is as dramatic as on your side. You can imagine you coming from an industry which was 15, 20 years cost cutting, turning every dime twice before spending it, hiring as late as possible to avoiding costs. Now we are growing 15%. We have to hire now, maybe without knowing what the person is doing, but we need them in 6 months. We are now putting 6 billion capex into the ground. We are not used to do that. We haven't never spent so much money, but we need that, and it's still not enough. So for us, it's a cultural change as well. I think the biggest change, if you ask me, for my company is we are used to be a product supplier. You told us what you need. A transformer, it has to be green, it has to be that kind of specification, and then we build it. Actually, you did a lot of the stuff around that, the planning, the knowledge. Now I think we are both in a market and an industry which is rapidly changing, and we have to learn now to understand your business much better, to come up with technical solutions, which we are not used to. Because you look sometimes at us and say, look, how can we solve that technical problem? And they say, look, we're doing products. No, this is the past. We have now looked into the future together. What is your challenge to understand your business better, to make right proposals? Huh? And that's a huge step for us for the next couple of years.
I have to ask you, Ben, it's mainly a question for you, but the whole panel might want to join in. I was taken by what you were talking about in terms of cooperation, lowering the time of the permit structure, even political systems coming together to facilitate this. What can you say? We're in a world with political winds that are not exactly, at least many places, in favor of this transition in the way we might see it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, there's quite a lot in that question. I'll talk about two things: affordability, and I'll talk about impact on local communities. And affordability, I'll draw the distinction between the UK and the US, the two major markets that we operate in. In the US, it is particularly in the Northeast where a lot of the renewable solution will be offshore wind. It is hard to argue for that because the US is awash with cheap gas. And so it is hard to argue that the Northeast US can transition quickly to a high renewable penetration system without an impact on affordability. It is hard. In the UK, we have the dubious, and in Europe as a whole, we have the dubious kind of benefit, in inverted commas, of gas now being expensive and subject to geopolitical risk because of Russia's actions primarily. And so I think we can make the case, you said it as well in your presentation around the costs, I think we can make the case in Europe that even if you don't lie in bed at night worrying about the climate, you should still be in favor of the energy transition because it is going to be more domestic energy, more secure energy, and it is now the lowest form of generation. And again, one of the things I often say about the UK, we are a net energy importer, the UK. We have no choice about that. Our share of the North Sea has been in decline. So for us, security is in diversity. And so we need more of everything, including renewables. On the community side, we do need to lean in heavily to this. But there's two things here. There's the outcome and there's the process. And people may not like the outcome, if you don't want pylons or a new transmission line in your area. Hopefully we can all agree, though, let's get a decision more quickly. It also almost doesn't matter whether we get approval or not approval. Let's get it after 3 years rather than 10 years, because if the answer is no, we'll go build it somewhere else, right? So I do think that we should all be able to agree that no matter what side of politics we're at, speeding up the process to get an answer one way or the other more quickly is a really good idea.
Thank you very much. Ingeborg, you get the last word in this panel. I asked Andreas what he needs to do or Hitachi needs to do differently, but what do you, Statnett, as a TSO, need to do differently?
This is the part where it's so easy to say it and it's so difficult to do it. Because I have 3 keywords here, right? It is this long-term planning, heard it many times, but it's actually a huge change because going from projects to programs, that's a different way of working. Truly utilizing our target network and our area plans to have those plans that 5 years is today, right? And coming up, we saw somebody with 20 years horizon. This is what we need to strive for. This is a huge change in how we work. Also, we're going then from being very transactional to having these kind of frame contracts, but in strategic partnerships. different way of working together. Then we go to standardization. Again, so easy to say, right? But how do we translate it into actions? For Statnett, we need to start with ourselves, because we are not standardized within, right? We are treating every project as different. So it is to what is the path? How are we doing this? When are we also then doing together with other TSOs? And how are we making sure that what we are standardizing is not something humongously big and expensive, but something that can truly scale? And cooperation, again, I think having this transparency, this getting the insight we talk about, it requires a different kind of trust. I think it requires also maybe some different meeting points. So it's to translate 3 simple words to action. That's what it is we will need to do. And but I think we are very motivated because we have to. And it helps. When you have to do something, it truly helps motivation.
Thank you so much to the panel for letting us pick your brains. Thank you.